everybody, and welcome to AI People. Today, we're talking to Carl Corbitt, who is founder and CEO at OpenPipe, which is a fine-tuning and RL platform for custom models and agents. Greetings, Carl.
Hey, very nice to be chatting, Ben.
So we always kick things off by asking people to make a few predictions about the AI industry as a whole. So first question is, how do you see humans and AI collaborating with regards to work in 5 years' time and then in 15 years' time?
Oh, wow. I think you probably get a diversity of answers there. So I would say I'm pretty, you could say it's optimistic or pessimistic, depending on what you think, good looks like. But I'm pretty optimistic that AI will replace a lot of the jobs that humans are doing today. Perhaps most or all of the jobs we're doing today. And I would expect certainly 15 years out, we would be at that point. 5 years out, harder to predict. There might still be some areas where it's not quite at human or superhuman levels, but I think in a lot of areas it will be. Lots of different ways the world could go and sort of human places in the world at that point. I am hopeful that we will find jobs that are still very meaningful to us, that matter a lot of things around building community, building connections, improving ourselves, even if they aren't the sort of things that today you would look at and say, oh, that's sort of economically necessary. I still think it'll be very important for the human soul effectively to have a purpose, and that we'll be able to find ways to give ourselves that purpose without having to worry about the economic aspect as much. So hopefully it'll be a very nice future for all of us.
But do you think we're going to be doing like completely different types of jobs, or are we going to be doing similar jobs but kind of supercharged with kind of these AI tools kind of collaborating with us, or is the AI going to be doing everything?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the job category we're talking about. Some jobs I think will look very similar. You look at things like chess or professional athletics, where machines could already easily beat anyone at chess, but we still have a lot of human competition there, and we celebrate people who do really well at that. I think a lot of jobs will look like that, where it's certain areas where, yes, we all know that a machine could do better than a human, but it's still very interesting to us being humans to see a human pushing themselves to the limits. So I think that kind of job, quote unquote, will become much more common across many different things. I don't know, competitive, whatever you can imagine that people do now, including things like, say, competitive coding, even if AI is much better at coding than humans, just for sort of that enjoyment of the mastery. I think that other kinds of jobs will look very different. I think any kind of jobs that people basically, I don't think people do jobs because they need to. I think people do jobs because it gives them fulfillment and something to do. So things that fit in that category will probably look very similar. Things that we're doing just because we have to, HR admin, whatever, stuff like that. I don't know. There's going to be someone out there who responds and says they love HR admin, and maybe there'll be a professional recreational league for HR admin. I don't know, but yeah, those kind of jobs I think will probably mostly just disappear and not be sort of like supercharged humans.
Okay. And looking into the future, like how do you see AI reshaping the global economy? Like, do you see more greater wealth inequality, or do you think we'll kind of narrow the gaps in opportunity for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is my best guess. My best guess is short term, we will see increased wealth inequality because there will be a lot of leverage you can get. If you have capital, if you have the right ideas, you'll be able to build something really fast. And that will exacerbate inequality. So in the short term, I think that is true, unfortunately. My guess is in the long term, and if we talk, the 15-year horizon or going out beyond that, my guess is in the long term, we'll actually see wealth inequality decreasing because there will be less, because AI will be better than humans at all of the things that produce economic value. And as a result, it will feel very unfair to organize society around like, oh, the smartest or best provisioned or best capitalized humans get the most resources because because AI is sort of taking up that niche. So I would expect that we'll move towards greater redistribution, something that looks more like socialism, perhaps, where there's just kind of like everyone has a basic income. But I don't think that that's a bad world, because I think that the sort of standard of living we'll all be able to achieve at that point will be vastly above even what the richest people have today. So hopefully it'll be okay.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of kind of the AGI question, I'll let you kind of put your own definition on what that might be, but do you think that's something we're kind of coming near to, or is it still 20, 30 years away?
Oh, no, no, I think we're quite close. I think that anyone looking at where we are today from 5, even 3 years ago, would say, yeah, we're right on the precipice. And I think it's just humans' sort of inability to extrapolate pretty clear trends that make people feel like perhaps we're far away. It feels very close to me.
Yeah. Okay, great. And AI as an industry loves a kind of a hot piece of news and kind of getting all hyped up about the next new thing. Like what's caught your attention over the last few weeks? Like what are you excited about?
Let's see. So over the last few weeks, I guess there's two different sides. One is on the frontier model side. So just yesterday, OpenAI dropped the price of O3, which is their
Yeah.
frontier flagship model, by 80%. That's a huge price drop, makes it competitive with GPT-4o, which was considered like significantly worse. And that's huge. I think that there's a lot of places where applying that level of intelligence is just going to make a huge difference, and people haven't been because it was quite expensive. They also released a slightly better model, O3 Pro, and we'll see sort of how well that performs. One other piece of news that I'm excited about is, on the open source side. So historically, I would say the open source models have lagged. They're also improving rapidly, but lagging the frontier models. That's still true, but yes, the trajectory is very exciting. I think the Qwen 3 models that came out a few weeks ago at this point, we've been using them, and basically everywhere we plug them in, they're just much better than any of the open source models we were using before. So exciting to see that development as well.
Yeah. Okay. Great stuff. So before we jump into OpenPipe, could you just give us, a brief introduction to yourself, like your background growing up, what got you into kind of coding in the first place, and then, your professional journey to becoming a founder?
Sure. Yeah, that could be a long story. I'll try and condense it.
Yeah.
So yes, let's see. I grew up. So I was lucky. I grew up here in the Seattle area. We're here because my dad was actually working at Microsoft back when it was a startup. And so I would say, to some extent, it sort of just runs in the genes. And then he ended up quitting Microsoft in the late '90s and starting his own company. So I guess you could say I'm, a lot of people who are entrepreneurs are sort of like bucking the traditional router family trends, and I'm almost the opposite. It's something
Yeah.
that was already in my family.
In the DNA.
Um, yeah, so I would say the uh, let's see. So yeah, career-wise, got out of school, tried to start up for a couple of years, didn't really work out. Ended up going to Google, worked there for a bit, then went to Y Combinator. I was there for about 4 years. I ran the startup school program, which is basically YC's external facing. So YC is a startup incubator for those who may not be familiar, quite a well-known one in the Bay Area. So I was there for about 4 years. Really great opportunity to sort of like see from the front lines trends in startups and also trends in AI. People may not know that OpenAI is a sister company to YC. It was founded by one of the CEO of YC at the time, Sam Altman. And so anyway, we got a chance. We would go over to their offices and have lunch with them and things like that. When it was just a small company of 20 people or so. So really got to see on the front lines what was happening, and seemed really exciting. So ended up leaving YC to jump into that industry.
I guess like being involved in YC, you get to see a lot of, what works and what doesn't in startups. So, that must have been quite informative for when you come to kind of found your own company.
Yeah, was really helpful.
So just jumping into OpenPipe then. So if we start on the kind of fine tuning side of what you do, because I know there are a couple of different products, but do you want to just explain in simple terms, like how you turn prompt history into kind of fine tune models?
Absolutely. So yeah, there's a couple of different ways that we find are very effective for using fine tuning, and it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So one is what we call model distillation, which is, let's say you've got a workflow deployed in production, you're using GPT-4o or O3, something like that. But you're running into one of the following issues. Either you need lower latency, so this happens a lot with voice chat, or anywhere where you're doing lots of calls and I need an answer back quickly. Or you're doing very high volume and it's not cost effective. So if you run into one of those two issues, you can use our distillation flow, which is quite easy. You basically just put a few lines of code into your code base, and it starts collecting all of the requests you're sending to your existing model, the responses you get back, And once you have a few hundred to a few thousand of those, you can just, through our UI, kick off a fine-tuning job. And what that'll do is it'll train a much smaller model to effectively emulate the larger model that you were using in production. And that can work because the smaller model is very specialized to the one specific task you're doing, as opposed to these frontier models that you were using before that have to be good at everything at the same time. So you end up with this smaller model. It's much faster to run. It's much cheaper to run. And so that's one direction you can go. The other thing we offer is reinforcement learning to make workflows and agents much more reliable. And that one's very exciting. That's actually where we're seeing a lot of the demand and a lot of the growth of the last 3 or 4 months. Because what that lets you do is it lets you actually improve your reliability and improve your performance accuracy. Whatever metric you're tracking can get better through reinforcement learning. For those who aren't familiar, reinforcement learning is basically it's just learning from experience. It's like on-the-job training. So it's the equivalent of taking your employee and instead of just having them repeat their first day on the job over and over and over again, which is what you get when you're calling one of these frontier models, you're actually like training it, letting it go through the flow a few different times, and then giving it feedback. Okay, yeah, that time you did a good job, that time you did a bad job, and then it quickly learns what good looks like in your specific workflow.
And who are you aiming these products primarily at? Are these more kind of sort of full stack developers, or like kind of ML engineers, or both, or where do you see this kind of best sitting?
Yeah, great question. So typically we're working directly with product teams that are the ones running this agent. Sometimes there are like machine learning engineers either embedded in the team, or sometimes with larger enterprises we're working with, it's that organization that is basically buying our product. But usually the people who are using our product are it's the actual product teams who've developed the agent, figured out like the exact workflow for it, and are now trying to figure out how to improve reliability.
And a lot of startups out there are still building kind of entirely on prompt engineering. Like, when would you see a move to something like OpenPipe coming in their kind of maturity?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's always the direction. I think that's the right way to do it. And in fact, even sometimes we'll work with, especially with larger enterprises, if we're doing like a white glove service, sometimes we'll come to them very early in the process where they're still figuring out what they want their agent to do. And when we come in at a place like that, and this is the advice I give everyone, we always say, start with prompting, get as far as you can, try to get your agent working with whatever the best frontier model is for your task, and get to the best place you can. And once you've done that and sort of gone through that effort to get to the best place you can there, then, maybe you're done. Like if it works, then I would say stick with that. There's no reason to change. The reason you would want to try fine tuning is if you're running into a hard constraint in one of the 3 areas I mentioned earlier, which are latency. So it's like, hey, I can't get a model that's fast enough for the experience I want to provide. Cost, I can't get a model that's cheap enough to make the unit economics work out for this product. Or reliability. So it's like, hey, I've got this agentic workflow and it works 60% of the time, but it's going to be a terrible user experience unless I can get it up to like 99% of the time. So if you're running into one of those 3 things, and you can't fix it by prompting better or using a different model, that's where I would bring in fine tuning or reinforcement learning.
And do you see companies building with a blend of different size models? Are they going to have like smaller kind of fine-tuned models for certain use cases and then perhaps work with the bigger ones for other use cases? Or do you think everything will move, more to working with smaller, more specialized models?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I think there will. So yes, we're definitely seeing a mix. We're seeing as companies get more sophisticated, as they move more use cases into production with AI. The right trade-off is not universal across all the different things you can do. So we definitely see people using all of them. I will say where I suspect long-term the breakdown will be is I suspect most tasks from a sort of like just counting the individual workflows or tasks you're trying to get a model to do, most tasks will not involve fine-tuning. They'll just use like very general purpose models. But if you count by sort of so total task volume, then by far it's going to be dominated by fine-tuned models, because once something becomes very high volume, it's something that you're doing thousands or millions of times a day or billions of times a day in some of our customers' cases, then it makes a lot of sense to sort of invest the time required to get the best performance out of it. just as an analogy for those of you who are engineers in the audience, I think it's quite similar perhaps to how you see different types of languages. So probably most code out there written is in, like at this point, Python or TypeScript or some higher level language. But if you look at like sort of like the lines of code that get executed the most, you're going to drop down to a lower, faster, more efficient language.
Okay. And in terms of like the research that I've been able to do, it seems that kind of prompt capture approach that you're kind of taking is quite unique when it comes to kind of fine tuning. Obviously there are lots of other companies out there that have platforms for fine tuning, but it seems like what you're doing is quite different to everybody else. Like what are the kind of pros of your approach, and what are maybe some of the drawbacks that another solution might be better for?
Yeah, so I would say we're coming from a background where we built products with AI before we designed this system. And so I feel like we came to it from a place where we had a lot of empathy for the end user and understanding where they're coming from, the problems they're running into, and how to solve them most efficiently. I think that it's much easier to adopt one of these models with our approach, frankly, than one where you have to do all the data set management yourself. Now, the downside, I would say, and you're describing, or what we're talking about here, is just the pure sort of distillation flow where you're going from a big model to a small model just by capturing the prompts and training on them. The downside to doing that is you're never going to exceed, or it'd be quite unusual to exceed the performance of the larger model you're moving from, what we call the teacher model, with that. So if you need better performance, if you need better reliability or accuracy, then you do have to somehow filter your data or get higher quality data, or do what I was talking about earlier, which is using reinforcement learning, which we also support.
Okay. And looking at some kind of broader trends in AI, I've seen you kind of talk before about overfitting with LLM models and how that can actually improve performance, which is a surprise result to you, I think. Have you seen that become a feature and kind of a more standard thing that you're seeing quite regularly?
Yeah. So what that research refers to, I think you're referencing, is in sort of traditional machine learning, like prior to LLMs, you could sort of there's this concept of loss, which is basically how well your model is able to predict the data that it's being fed in. And so typically, what you would do is you would sort of have like one set of data, which is what you're training on, and then a separate set of data that you're holding out, which is called like the test set or the validation set, and you're using that to make sure that the model is actually getting better. And so what you do is you monitor this loss number, and you see the loss. Typically, the pattern you see is you see the loss getting lower and lower and lower, which means better and better and better on your training data. And then you'll see on your separate eval data, which you're not training on, you're just using to sort of monitor the training process, you see the loss also going low and lower and lower and lower until some point you hit that overfitting, which is when your model is just starting to memorize the training data as opposed to kind of like generalizing, which is typically not what you want. And so the way you can detect that is the evaluation loss, instead of continuing to drop, it then starts picking up again as the model just is like getting too focused on the training data. So your eval loss sort of does this like parabolic shape and then starts going back up. So that's what's referred to historically as overfitting. What we found is that with LLMs, for whatever reason, that's no longer a good indicator. So you can see even after your evaluation loss starts to pick back up, if you actually look at kind of like the model's performance on the eval set or on other data, it's actually still improving, even though the loss doesn't indicate that, which is a weird result. It was very surprising to people in ML. I think, frankly, at this point, the industry has sort of digested that, and just like that prior best practice of tracking the eval loss and then cutting it off when it starts rising is not something I see people talking about much anymore.
Yeah, they've just kind of adapted to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I've seen you kind of mention was, LLM providers have started to kind of build in kind of fine-tuning features on their platform. And I know that you don't see that as being a, kind of a big killer for OpenPipe. Do you want to kind of just talk a bit about where OpenPipe sits in that now?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think the market's really large. I think companies, so yeah, OpenAI is the big one that has built in and invested quite a lot actually in first-party fine-tuning. I really respect the team there. I've met I think most of the people who work on that team, and I think they're doing great work, and I think they're going to have a lot of success with that. There's a lot of companies that want that experience. I think that there's also a very large number of companies, and this includes most of the biggest ones, that are very conscious of vendor lock-in, and they're already a little concerned about, even on the prompted side, just using OpenAI, and they definitely don't want to be in an ecosystem where they're just customizing OpenAI models and just getting fully locked into that platform if there's any alternative. And so OpenPipe is a great alternative if you want to use the open source ecosystem. If you're trying to do it yourself, there's a lot of rough edges there, and we're a company that can help you navigate that and build best-in-class tooling to actually get good results out of these open source models, while still getting a really nice, really clean and thoughtful user experience that makes it easy for people to adopt.
And then I guess you kind of own the model at the end, so it's kind of building in value for the company rather than, maybe building in value for OpenAI, you could say.
That's right. Yeah. So the model, the end result is owned by the company, so they get full flexibility there.
And with the kind of developers that you've been working with over the last couple of years and kind of using your product, like what's the most surprising thing that you've seen them do?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Definitely different kinds of things. One thing that actually probably maybe the most surprising to me is that I've been surprised by the small number of very concrete use cases that we see coming up over and over again across multiple customers. So there's half a dozen use cases that we have, maybe 3 or 4 different customers all basically building the exact same use case. I would have expected a lot more diversity, frankly, than we're seeing so far, at least. So yeah, these are things like customer support bots, like psychology, this is a therapist effectively, AI companions, voice transcription. These are all things where we see like multiple different companies all building. Did I say customer support? That's a big one for us. Anyway, these are all different areas where we see several different companies all building very similar kind of products with their own twist on it, of course, but trying to solve the same problem. And what I've seen less of are sort of just like one-off, hey, we're building something completely unique. We get a lot of that as well, but yeah, it's less diversity than I'd expected.
Okay, so thinking about kind of the process of building a startup in the AI space, just when, if we go back to the beginning of OpenPipe, like how did you go about landing your first paying customer? And, just talk us through that process. How did that work?
Yeah, so we went through Y Combinator as part of founding the company. We actually started, we barely made, we joined like more than halfway through the batch, just because I already knew the team there from my prior experience. So, but it was extremely helpful. That's how we got our first probably 4 or 5 customers, was through YC's network. So for us, that was very helpful. We launched through there. We did a lot of content marketing effectively internally to other YC companies. We were able to get early customers. Before we even really had a product, we were able to get people who were willing to bet on us, and we did a lot of custom work to get things working for them. And then yeah, from there, we've continued to have good success with the YC network, but also lots of external content marketing has been our biggest channel by far. So we'll put together a lot of blogs, a lot of posts on X, just explaining what we're finding works and doesn't work, and we find that that's great for getting customers.
And talking about the problem effectively that people are facing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And obviously, as the team started to grow, like what have you found like the toughest hire that you've had to make so far? Whether it's like a tough skill set to find, or just like the right cultural fit. Where's that been?
Yeah. So we're all in person in Seattle. That's been something of a limitation, certainly in some ways. There've been a couple of really great candidates I would have loved to have gotten who ultimately decided that this, living in, moving here was not the move they wanted to make. I think, overall, we've kept the team very small intentionally, relative to the amount of money we've raised. Because we want to keep the bar very high, and we think that like being able to move quickly is really important right now, and a smaller team helps us do that. Yeah, honestly, I'm pretty happy with the team. I think we've got like a world-class team in this area. Every single hire takes a lot of time. Every single hire takes a lot of interviews. But I think we've been able to find the people we're looking for.
And with a kind of a go-to-market approach focused on developers, like how do you then think about that when expanding into the enterprise? Like, do you take a similar type of approach, like for different size companies, or do enterprise companies have a, a unique approach for you?
Yeah, so we found that the content marketing is still helping a lot. We changed the messaging a little bit. We'll call it like a webinar because they like to hear about webinars, instead of just like a discussion or something. But typically, like, it seems to be working pretty similarly, where basically just putting out a lot of content about what we're doing gets people to come inbound. We've started doing a little bit of outbound as well. We've been doing enterprise dinners over the last 2 months, which seems to work pretty well, where we'll organize a dinner and we'll do a lot of outbound surrounding that and find people who we think could benefit from our solution and invite them to come so we can start building a relationship there. So that's the main thing we've added on, but the biggest channel is still that effectively inbound that comes from our content marketing.
Okay. And so just want to finish off by asking about kind of the San Francisco, remote hiring. You mentioned that you're based in kind of Seattle. I mean, San Francisco feels a bit like a vortex for the whole AI world at times because, everybody kind of wants people based there. Do you want to talk about some of the pros and cons, the trade-offs, the benefits of being an SF or being remote or, being based in Seattle?
Yeah, absolutely. So remote first, I guess taking remote first in the discussion, we did think about that a little bit, but I think at the stage we're at, it just wouldn't work. We wouldn't be able to move as fast as we need to. So having people in the office where there's just a natural, clear, organic collaboration has helped us just get things shipped much more easily and quickly than we could, even though we've had to, like I said, ultimately say no to some really fantastic people to make that work. As far as Seattle versus San Francisco, so I think there's pros and cons. When we were starting the company, we actually were in San Francisco for 3 months. I've also lived, I was living there 5 years before this company when I was at YC and Google. So I'm very familiar with that ecosystem. I also fly down there at least once a month at this point. Luckily, Seattle and SF is a pretty short flight. So I'm very familiar with that ecosystem, and a lot of my founder friends are based there. And what I found is, like, yes, hiring in Seattle is tough. But I think hiring in San Francisco is tougher because you have so much competition from other startups who all look very similar from the outside, plus the competition from the big labs, plus the competition from Fang, who's absolutely desperate to get talent with these kind of skill sets. So that's talking to founders there. It sounds like, even though it is true, there's certainly a higher talent density and higher absolute number of people with this skill set. You're also competing with many other employers. Whereas what we find is, there's definitely a smaller pool to draw from. It's still, though, like a surprisingly large pool. We really benefit from the fact that we've got Microsoft and Amazon here, and there's like a certain set of people who come here, say they graduate from like a really great program, they go to work for big tech, and they realize, oh wow, big tech kind of sucks, or at least is not a good
Yeah,
fit,
they don't want to do that anymore
for their personality. So they look for something smaller and more exciting, and there aren't as many options, I guess I would say, in Seattle, which has been given us an advantage in landing people that fit that profile.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like the hiring scene in San Francisco is absolutely crazy at the moment because, as you say, everybody's kind of competing for, quite a small pool of people who've got the skills. So being in Seattle, I guess there's not that many startups doing what you're doing there. So you've got a clear differentiator when you talk to people straight away.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, it's been really good having you on today, Carl. If people want to get in touch, what's the best way to reach you? Are you on email, LinkedIn, Twitter? Where do you spend most of your time?
Yeah, so easiest is on Twitter. You can DM me. I always check my DMs. It's my handle is CORBTT, or just look up Kyle Corbitt. And so anyway, yeah, CORBTT. Yeah, please reach out there. Would be very happy to connect. Also, Kyle Corbitt on LinkedIn is fine as well.
Great stuff. Well, thank you for your time today, and thank you to everybody watching. And stay tuned for the next episode of AI People coming soon.